Welcome into another edition of Spits and Suds. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for spreading the word and growing the show. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan, joined by our Stars insider from EP Ringside. He has his own Substack, which means he gives you exclusive information. That's at Shap Shots. He also writes for D Magazine. And, of course, he's a Hollywood superstar. It's Sean Shapiro. How are you, my friend?
I don't know about superstar, but the movie is the movie. There is a movie coming out. So
yes.
I guess we'll let that go.
Yes.
I guess I'll let you amp it up that way.
As your hype man, sir. As your hype man, Hollywood Shapiro. Let me do my job. So Friday night, you were at the South Carolina Stingrays game. Let me know how that went.
That was good. That was we haven't spoken. We spoke right before that happened. Yep. So it was pretty cool. I'd seen the movie the night before, but I'd seen it in the cast and crew screening, and it was so everyone is in that room is obviously has worked on it, so it's kind of the people that you worked on the movie with and everything. And then Friday night was kind of the first like, oh geez, it's out in the world type thing, and it was on the video board down where the Stingrays play during the second intermission, and it was really cool to see. Like, it was cool to see the reaction. It was cool to see people. Actually digging it and everything like that. It was. I know for a fact. It's funny. There's a story on the. There was a story on the two guys who. The real reasons this movie happened. One of them is my good friend Jeff Tyner, and Jeff is the director and writer of this movie, and he's from Charleston, South Carolina, and his good friend also from Charleston named Jeff Zucker, and they're from Charleston, and there was a nice little news piece in the Charleston local ABC affiliate, I think, down there afterwards, and I was apparently both. Jared Bednar, who coaches for the Avalanche now, obviously, has ties to South Carolina. Yep. Heard about the movie through that clip, and so did Spencer Cadbury, the current coach of the Washington Capitals. So
nice.
It was a pair of NHL coaches with Charleston ties. We're happy to find out there was a hockey movie with Charleston ties. So it was a really cool. It's really cool to see it kind of come to life, and I'm excited for people to see this movie when it comes out.
Absolutely, and one of the co-stars of that, I was watching the Spit and Chicklets podcast, which is one of the biggest hockey podcasts in North America, and we've done several stories here on Spits and Suds about them because they've kind of changed some things, as far as breaking some stories, and they've had great guests and everything. Just massive stick taps to what they've been able to pull off, because once again, I think they've done a good job of growing the great game of hockey and showing the personality that hockey has. But their main host, R.A., is also in the movie in a starring role. So did you get some time with him?
Yeah, R.A.'s he plays the Zamboni driver in the movie, and I don't think we'd met before the movie. We might have. I mean, but we hadn't actually hung out in a close capacity before or anything like that before we worked on the movie together. And he was also down at the game in Charleston last week, and obviously he's got a lot more fame than I do. People were wanting his signature and everything like that. But it was good. I was actually, funnily enough, RA actually sent me a picture the other day that he had from on set I play the goalie in this movie, right? And there's a picture he sent me the other day where he's just like kind of like menacingly, like almost seems like Phantom of the Opera-esque, like standing behind the glass behind the goal. It was cool to get to know him a little bit. He's obviously I've listened to their show over there and everything like that, and but now it was he was one of the people who were helped make this happen too, and Him and the other hockey quote unquote celebrity in this one is Zach Bell, who does the if you ever seen someone doing trick shots on hockey on TikTok, on Instagram, or whatever, it's probably Zach from Always Hockey fame. So he was in it too. So um, kind of cool to see all of that. It was kind of funny because obviously RA has a bit of they did a little bit of an autograph signing for those two during the first intermission at the Stingrays game, and there was two lines. It was kind of funny. There was a line, and it would be all of the dads were trying to all of the 30 40 something year old dads who clearly listen to the show are trying to get RA's autograph while their 10 12-year-old kids are with them in line because Zach's there. Yeah. So it was kind of funny to see the demographic the double demographic connection on that there. So
yeah, absolutely. They've struck gold with that show, and that is interesting, the different demos. So congratulations, Hollywood, and thank you for making the time for us today. All right, so this is why you need to sign up for Sean's Substack at Shapshots, and he has it on Twitter how you can do it. And the reason I say that is because you'll hear the Q&A between him and Stars general manager Jim Nill, and we'll present a lot of it to you today on Spits and Suds because we appreciate you guys. And I got a really, really cool comment that people commented on the podcast, and they talked about all the insiders that we have on and kind of the information that they can't find anywhere else. So you sat down with Jim Nill prior to last night's tilt, Detroit, Dallas, and some really, really interesting questions. I mean, massive stick tap to you, Sean, because if I were to pick 5 or 6 questions, you nailed them. I mean, you actually talked about what I wanted to hear. And let's start with, Heiskanen returning and your conversation regarding Nils Lundqvist's development.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for the commentary on that. That was I'm glad to hear it's connecting with the at least one reader, you being you, Gavin. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
I loved
it. It was it was, to me, it was really one of the things I wanted to kind of talk to Nill about in general is because it's the Nils Lundqvist narrative is a fascinating one, right? Like where and how and where this is all going to go, right? And the fact of the matter about this is Miro Heiskanen's injury has opened up a chance for Nils Lundqvist to kind of play through some mistakes that he might not have been able to play through before. And we've talked before about how we think like there's some things where they need to give Lundqvist a little bit more leash in your and I's opinion, and that's fine. But it was, to me, one of the most interesting things kind of reading into this. And Jim is always very polished when he speaks and everything like that. But I do think I get him to open up a little bit more than most people. The interesting thing was talking about how for the coaching staff, to me, like Jim mentioned how the coaching staff was looking for a little bit more offensive production from Nils Lundqvist, which is fine. And while Jim was kind of talking about how he was a little bit more focused on looking at the defensive side, and it's not saying that those two aren't on the same page. It's not saying that Pete DeBoer and Jim Nill aren't on the same page. It's more so, to me, it's just interesting to kind of see how it gives us a little bit of insight of how the two sides see things and how we can kind of properly assess where this goes. Because in the long term, and based off my conversation with Jim Nill, Nils Lundqvist is, I feel more confident that Nils Lundqvist is part of this long-term plan, and that's not, and I may not have, I would have had doubts about that before some of my recent conversations. Whether it's kind of changed a little bit how I kind of thought and how I think we assess and look at each game for Lundqvist, just try to using how his bosses are assessing him. And I think that's valuable. Like Pete DeBoer and his staff, they want to see Lundqvist add some offensive spark. They want to see him create. Jim Nill looks at him, Jim Nill kind of believes that's already there and wants to see how do you work defensively, because I want to see how my pairings are going to build next year and the year after. Who's going to play with Thomas Harley? Who's going to play with Miro? I think it was interesting to me to kind of see that play out. And also a little bit more like, as of now, I feel better today saying Nils Lundqvist will be part of this team 2-3 years from now than I would have before my conversation last night.
That's really interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting. And I mean, kudos to Lundqvist. I think he's played, particularly well when he's been getting that reps, which we've been talking about. At some point, that's been the toughest thing, as many people that watch the Stars, one of the biggest commentaries I hear about this organization, Sean, is they don't let the young players play and play out those mistakes.
And that's true to an extent. Let's be clear on something, right? Like, that is one of the commentaries, and there are definitely elements to it, but there are also, let's also not forget the other side of it too. Wyatt Johnston got to play all 82 games last year.
Mm-hmm.
Miro Heiskanen from the beginning was given his chances. Like, I mean, and as much as people are like, oh, those are great players, like, there are players who have proven that if you're good enough at that young age, you're not going to be limited. And even as much as Ty Dellandrea is in the discussion right now, and talk about a bad penalty last night. That's for Ty Dell. Like, that's for a guy who needs to. Yeah.
And just to jump in real quick, I hated that because I thought Dellandrea played really well. I liked his hustle. I liked his hustle on the ice. They highlighted on the TV broadcast that tremendous back check that he had, and then getting back right in front of the net. So those things, and that just completely changed the third period. And all I could think of was you and I talking about what he did in Calgary with that costly mistake toward the end of the game. And I was like, man, if he sits next game, I mean, it is what it is, but I just hated it because he had played so well all game.
Yeah, and it's the spot where, even with everything that's gone on with Ty Dellandrea this year, he still played 82 games last year. It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. That's the other thing. Like, Ty Dellandrea had his chance, and Thomas Harley there was some slow playing in. He went to the AHL and everything like that, but he's had his chance. So I think you can be critical of management of certain players when it comes to the Stars and usage and everything like that. But it's also, I don't think it's as fair to paint with a single brush as some people like to do when it comes to tweets and comments and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You did ask about Mavrik, Bourque, and Logan Stankoven because, I mean, good on Pete DeBoer, but, when they sent him down, he felt as though they were, quote, NHL ready in several aspects. They always have things that they can work on, but you asked Jim Nill about Stankoven and Bourque and their future as far as when they'll come up or what's Nill's thoughts of that. And I thought he gave a pretty good answer, Sean, regarding, the now is here, but at the same time, you need those guys for the future as far as salary cap. And I'm glad he brought up salary cap because I'm hoping that we can get out of this cap restraint that we've had for the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's a big thing. Like, it's the spot where you look at the Stars and you look at where they are with some of the players they have, and they move out of this window. Like, we talk a lot about Wyatt Johnston, but man, Gavin, someday soon we're going to have to go through the Wyatt Johnston next contract discussion, because he is, like, as great as he has been playing and everything like that, he is creating a bit of a welcomed financial headache.
Yes.
That I don't think anyone would have kind of imagined before we not going into this season, but I don't think, I say even this year, actually, you know what? Like, I think Wyatt Johnston, not that I expected Johnston to hit a sophomore wall or anything like that. I just don't think I would have expected Wyatt Johnston to be sometimes their best player on almost a nightly basis. That's something where I don't think I would have expected that. Like, I thought he would have been good this year. And so he is definitely creating some interesting decisions down the line that are going to impact how many and how much veteran forwards the Stars can use. And, like, kind of fiscally, financially speaking, the longer you can delay the big paydays for Logan Stankoven and Mavrik Bourque, if they become the players you think they are, the better right now. And that's something that Jim Nill and his staff are kind of having to manage right now and think about, because it's the thing about that we've talked about the Stars a lot, and I like how they handle things. I do like that they focus on not selling everything out for 1 year. Like, you don't want to be the Columbus Blue Jackets who sold out everything for 1 year in one playoff series, and now look where they are. Right. And I think the Stars have done a pretty good job of making sure that they don't lose track of the long-term goal. The goal is to win a Stanley Cup, but it's also to still compete. But it's not to win a Stanley Cup and then trade that for 10 seasons of down years.
So. Yeah, absolutely. And for reference, Wyatt Johnston has 1 more year after this, and then he becomes a restricted free agent. But at the same time, I could see them starting to have initial conversations in this offseason about, semi like a Heiskanen deal where you get the big contract, you still under that contract for 1 more year, the old contract, and then the new one kicks in. So
he's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting how Johnston wants to play this, because he's gonna be one of those guys who's kind of right at the spot where he'll be an RFA, so he won't have full rights and everything like that. It'd be interesting to see how he and the Stars play. Is it a bridge deal for a couple years? Is it something where he wants to cash in big time now? It'd be very interesting to kind of watch next year what happens with him. So
I'm really excited. All right, next question you asked Jim Nill, and this is what I love about Sean, folks, because we've heard this feedback on Spits and Suds. So you figure, and Sean has a terrific relationship with Jim Nill. That's why you hear Sean a lot on this program, and that's why we love him as an insider. I spoke with, Stars GM Jim Nill. And I love the way you start with this question. Bear with me on this, but Jake Oettinger hasn't been good this season as he was past years, even before the injury. I absolutely love how you started that question, because you're basically saying, like, here's my opinion. Also, here's the opinion of others, but we need to get the general manager's, opinion. So I thought that was very interesting. And, his answer as well was kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was. And Jim is an optimist. He is someone who he's optimistic and he's pragmatic at the same time. And with Oettinger, right, it is kind of weird too to be having this discussion about the all-star representative for the Stars at the same time, where Oettinger has not been as good this year, and it's okay to say that. It's also reflective of how high the standard is. And Nil, the thing I was curious from Nil's perspective on this, and he kind of agreed with me a little bit, was the fact that at some point, every goalie is going to have ups and downs. That's just the nature of the position. And you don't want to be the Winnipeg Jets in the playoffs when Connor Hellebuyck struggled, because we saw what happened last year when Connor Hellebuyck had a bit of a downtime, and then all of a sudden the Jets just fell apart because basically their safety blanket was gone. And I think the Stars and Oettinger kind of learned to lean on each other a little bit. And Jim kind of echoed that a little bit, where it's like it was important to see how the team responded to this and how they went that way and everything. And it's kind of one of the classic things where if this season is all about what happens in May and June, in a weird way, the struggles that Oettinger had, they may have been for the better. It's a weird way to put it, but it's definitely it is a reality in this big picture world here.
Yeah, so. And the general manager won't say it, but I think an improved defense in front of him would certainly help. Yesterday on Spits and Suds program, Sean, Craig highlighted something that I mentioned on the post-game show last night. Every single game, it seems as though they've lost positioning in front of the net. Craig was explaining he'd like to see sticks up. He does not like that their sticks are down. And he feels as though you got to focus more on the man. And that's how you get better positioning. So I thought that was interesting. And
I would, I actually would, Gavin, I would actually love for next time you have Craig on. I would love for you to ask him about, so Jim if you look in that answer that Jim gave me, one of them was about how it's harder to box out now. You can't really box guys out and everything like that. I would be fascinated to hear Craig's perspective
Yep.
on that for him watching the game now, as opposed to obviously a guy who played the game when the box out was a huge part of the game. So I'd be curious to hear your. So
I will do it next week. When I asked the question, he said, "Don't get me started."
Yeah.
So next week I will get him started, because I know it's a point, and it's a point that Stars fans are seeing on a recurring basis. So I will certainly ask him about that. And then you also talked to Jim Nill about analytics, and I like the way that you used NFL example as far as Tampa going for 2 against Detroit and how that relates to analytics. And I'm glad he said what he said. And, I just want to, Jim Nill responds to you, if the analytics actually said something and that's how you use them, they'd have been killed off already by NHL teams, because analytics would have said the Detroit Red Wings should have beat or won the Stanley Cup in the year they lost the first round to the Anaheim Ducks in 4 straight. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, because I think that some watch the Stars and maybe think that they might be too analytic based as far as not going out to get that quote unquote physical presence. Yeah, and I will raise my hand on that one.
It's I think it's kind of the space with all teams. It feels like, in general, when it comes to hockey analytics, it feels like too often people feel like they have to be pro or anti usage, one way or the other. And I really think there's this big gray area that just doesn't get properly addressed well enough in the way it actually gets used. Like, I think there are times and there are tools that times and tools where it works well and you can use it for this or that. But there's also other things that there's not a large enough sample size, right? Like, it's, if somebody goes and says, hey, we're going to use this, well, how do you account for goaltending, one of the greatest equalizers in the sport? How do you account for, like, analytically speaking, how do you account for Jake Oettinger coming off illness? Like, there's little things like that you just need the larger sample size, and you figure out what works and what doesn't. And I'm not being a Stars slappy and defending this. I just think the reality is, I think the Stars kind of have done a good job finding a bit of that balance, because they are talking to Nill, talking to other people in the organization. There's a bit of an understanding that you need to find a way to combine this team, and you look at how they've built that team on the front end. It's so big. It can wear people down, and they can hold the puck. But they also, at the same time, you look at the back end, you're like, okay, you'd like another guy like that on the defensive end. I think we do see evidence that things are getting, I think kind of hey, the Stars don't use this or do this or whatever. It's, I actually think the Stars are actually doing a pretty good job of trying to manage and figure it all out. And with all this, and the best part is we all don't know the exact answer. 5 years from now, we could be like, oh, you know what? We know this, and you and I might not even know what that stat is right now. And that's kind of the wild thing about this era of analytics, because while baseball analytics and football and even soccer are so well versed out in all of the private sector stuff has basically become public, we've only got a snippet right now on the public side of what the NHL teams actually see. I actually remember talking to the assistant GM for the Carolina Hurricanes about this, and like, he was talking about how right now you look in the public space, and it's like turning the data in the public space right now. What we see is like turning a light on and off and just doing it like every 4 or 5 seconds, where what they see on the back end is like the light never turns off. You have all the data. So it's a space that is fascinating where the growth is going with all of this. So
April will mark.
I hope that makes sense.
It totally does. And April will mark 11 years that Jim Nill has been general manager of this team, and it's his first general manager gig. And I would guess last.
Yeah.
And I will say this, Sean, and feel free to respond. I mean, there were some years that the Stars, they went through numerous years where they didn't make the playoffs. The signings of Alice Hemsky didn't work out. Martin Hansel, the draft pick of Julius Honka didn't work out. Riley Tufte didn't work out. But, within that, there have been the Bourques, the Stankovens, the Duchene signing. Radulov was a good signing for the first 2 years. There have been some key signings. Pavelski obviously is up there. Wyatt Johnston was a terrific draft pick.
The Duchene deal's been very good this year.
Yeah. You pointed that out in the article, and it was interesting that he said that he has performed above expectations, which I thought was great. And he also said something that was interesting that I agree with, in that he feels as though Duchene is more comfortable because he's not taking a leading role. He can just play his game. And I did find that fascinating. By the way, I mean, we've seen the Owen Tippett over and over again. Boy, and I know it's not going to show up on highlights, but that pass to Mason Marchment for that one-time kind of slap in last night just shows Matt Duchene. I mean, that thing was right on the tape. If it's a foot or two elsewhere, Marchment has to stop his stride. Maybe that's a difference maker, but he's just done that over and over again. I mean, I think he's been above expectations for all of us. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts as Nill as a whole, because you have a good relationship with him. I do like how he's been very open and honest, and he's been out there as a general manager answering questions.
I really respect it, because it's not the status quo for NHL GMs. There's some that are very guarded, very hidden on things, and I think little things like being open and honest about, hey, Miro Heiskanen is going to play this week. That doesn't hurt you. That doesn't hurt that doesn't hurt you. It doesn't to give it's something that, you know what? It builds a better rapport with your fan base, and you know what? Maybe someone going to the game now. Someone going to the game this week at home, you can look forward to Miro Heiskanen playing a game. I think there's little things like that some GMs still think this is rocket science or brain surgery or whatever ridiculous comparison you want to use. And I think at the end of the day, Jim Nill also understands that this is entertainment. We are at the kids' table in the world, and that's okay. And while it's serious and there's lots of money on the line and people have jobs, at the end of the day, it is sports. And I think Jim Nill understands that. I know he understands that. We've talked about it before. And so I like that he remembers that and is willing to talk about these things. It's not state secrets. It's not like he's working at the Pentagon. And I like that a lot. And I think other GMs could learn a lot from that, and it would make hockey a lot more from an entertainment standpoint and understanding standpoint. If more people use that approach, it would be great. I also think Nill has done a really good job of understanding what his job is in this market with his respective boss. And that's something that I always think gets lost, because for all 32, in general, they technically all have the same job. All 32 NHL GMs have a different job if you really think about it. Jim Nill's job as a GM is to, he'd like to win a Stanley Cup, but Jim Nill's job as a GM is to build a cup contending team that reaches the playoffs on a mostly annual basis. And on top of that, he has to kind of build a team that fits a bit of the mold that Tom Ghilardi likes, because you have an owner that likes to put his fingers in. And we've kind of seen Ghilardi have his moments where it slips through on radio spots and things like that. So that's what Jim Nill's job is. And I think he understands his job. He understands the market he works in. He understands that this is how you approach this job. He doesn't have the same job that Steve Yzerman has in Detroit. He doesn't have the same job that Barry Trotz has in Nashville, or the same job that Danny Briere has in Philadelphia. Same title, but different job. And I think understanding that job, that's one of the reasons that, let's look this up real quick. Of the current NHL general managers, he is now the fourth longest tenured NHL GM, after only Doug Armstrong, Kevin Cheveldayoff, and Jarmo Kekalainen. Now, I have a hard time believing Jarmo Kekalainen will still be the GM in Columbus at the end of this season. So he's probably soon to be the third most tenured NHL GM. And with how things are going in Dallas, I think he's going to be there until the day he decides and we talked about, I think I mentioned on the show before, where the day he and Tom Ghilardi decide to promote him to director of hockey operations and someone else technically becomes the GM the same way Kelly McCrimmon became the GM in Vegas after George McPhee. So
let's give a quick preview before we go. Anaheim on Thursday night. Interesting team, young team coming up, mixed with some veterans. It'll be interesting to see how they or what they do at the upcoming trade deadline. In their last 10, they're 3-7. But when you go down this roster, it's kind of interesting. Frank Vetrano's having a terrific year for them. Troy Terry obviously is a really exciting player. Henrique, McTavish, Cam Fowler. They have a guy that we were kind of interested in seeing, how would Radko Gudas look in a Stars uniform for that physicality. So, interesting team up and down, obviously learning their way. They won last night against Buffalo. So give me your thoughts on Anaheim and what the Stars need to do.
Yeah, it's a Ducks team that is, when you talk about the path to winning a Stanley Cup at some point, I actually think they're doing a good job of starting to build that foundation. It's not next year or the year after or anything like that, but I think between Leo Carlsson, who unfortunately is still dealing with the injury, I believe, and the trade for Cutter Gauthier, and you got it's a really good young defenseman in Pavel Mintyukov, who's coming up and playing very well this year. I really like the way the Ducks have gone about this build, where it's been Pat Verbeek has been given a bit of the time to slow play it and get it going, and they have went and kind of checked those boxes of getting those pieces that, hey, this is what you need for a real cup contender in 3 to 4 years. And I think that's what you're seeing in Anaheim. They're a fun team to watch. They're not necessarily good right now, but they are fun. The other interesting thing for me, Gavin, I look at the Ducks I look at the Ducks kind of cap picture for the next couple of years and everything like that, right? And as good of a year and as good of a story as Frank Vetrano is, I wonder so he's making $3.65 million this year. He's 29. He'll be 30 in March. He's having a career year. Yep. He's got and everything like that. As much as at the same time, doesn't he feel like a guy to you, right? Who his value will never be higher to the Ducks rebuild process,
correct,
than by trading him this season, right? I
Agreed.
know he's under contract for next year, and he makes 3 points, and it's a nice, but you don't know if he's going to have a career year next year, and even at the end of this deal, he's going to be 31, and you're going to have some other piece, and you're going to have some other players that are going to be up, and you're going to be transitioning your court. Just, it feels like to me Vetrano is the type of player who he's not a pending UFA this year, but he's the type of guy who could be moved this year at the deadline because his value will never be higher. And for a team trading for him, it's not a rental. It's a 2-year investment. And so he's a guy who I watch and look at it that way. So the most frustrating thing right now, just with this team right now, is the injury parts of it, where you're like, I would love Stars fans to tell them to go watch Pavel Mintyukov, who's hurt right now, and he's been a great young defenseman. I'd love to see. Obviously Zegras brings an element. He's hurt right now, so it's just this team can be really fun. They're just a bit banged up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the other interesting, if he plays tomorrow night, is goalie John Gibson. Win last night, like I said, in Buffalo. This is what's interesting about Gibson, and this is what's interesting about, we talk about up and down Anaheim. Goals allowed and save percentage. So last night, 2 goals allowed, .933 save percentage. Before that, 4 goals allowed, .778. 1 goal allowed prior to that, .963 save percentage. And then he, in the previous 2 games to that, 4 goals allowed, 5 goals allowed. So he is one of those guys that, can have those big games. He's got 3 years left on his contract after this season. He's got a modified no trade, which isn't a problem really, but what is an issue is that $6.5 million contract. But I was just thinking, like, if a team could find a way, I really feel as though with like a little bit better defensive core, maybe a different system, I'd like to see John Gibson go on a run, because I think he's one of those goalies that has been consistently pretty good over the years, stolen some games, just a solid goalie that I'd be interested in. Salary cap wise, I don't think they can put up. But what is John Gibson in Edmonton, for example? Or something like that, even though their goalie's hot right now. So that's the other name that I don't know if you can trade him. Anaheim might have to absorb some of that money.
Yeah, they definitely would. I would love to see him play for a good team, because I think he's got a bit of that swagger factor. It's just John Gibson to me is always that guy who you watch for 2.5 periods, and then in the third period, there's always the forlorn 1,000-foot stare of like, what have I done with my career? It's
you're so right, yeah.
And it's so right. He just looks up and is like, I could have been anywhere, but I'm here.
I'm telling you, he plays tomorrow night, Stars fans. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this Anaheim, so definitely go to the game, but watch John Gibson, and every once in a while he'll make those saves, and you're like, "Oh my God, can you imagine this guy on a team?" And then you're right, the final score is like 6-3, Anaheim loses.
Yeah.
Oh, that is great. I think if the Stars play their game, they could pick up 2 points, and then same, against Washington, who's kind of on a older but trying to find their way into the playoffs as a wild card. So a chance for the Stars to pick up some more points heading into the All-Star break. Well, my friend, Thank you so much for bringing all the information. I have to let you go because you got important calls to go on and do your hockey thing, but we always appreciate your insight and being an insider for Spits and Suds. Some awesome information. I didn't even want to get into really last night's game because we did that on the post game of Spits and Suds, and to me the focus was some new information. You talked to Jim Nill about some really important subjects that we handled today on Spits and Suds. So thank you so much, Beast.
It's been fun, and we get to keep doing this, Gavin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's do it again soon.
Yes, absolutely. We will do it again soon. He may be going to Hollywood, but he's sticking with us for a while. He is Sean Shapiro, and we truly appreciate his insight. Once again, you can sign up for his Shap Shots. And he has all of his Substack information on his Twitter page. And also, you can buy his book, Never Too Early for Father's Day. It's called We Win Here. So for Sean Shapiro, and thank you so much, everyone. We've had some amazing comments that you've left on our podcast along with Stars. As we continue to grow this thing, we'll be back again tomorrow night after the game with a post game. So really excited about that as well. For Sean Shapiro, I'm Gavin Spittle. Have a great day, everyone.